high desert of northern New Mexico, this is Circle for Original Thinking. I'm your host, Glenn Aparicio Perry. Welcome to Circle for Original Thinking, America's electronic talking circle for visionary thinkers, an open forum for fresh ideas and timeless wisdom applied to today's political and ecological challenges. Each episode, we bring together creative thinkers from a variety of different traditions. We ask the hard questions on the important issues of the day: political polarization, climate change, virulent viruses, and other symptoms of humanity being out of balance with the natural world. Our goal is to recreate a whole and sacred America and world, a new and improved version of E Pluribus Unum, from the many to the one, and this time not leave anyone out. Join us as we embark on this quest. And now we continue with part 2 of our fascinating dialogue with Jeffrey Mishlove and Leo Ruickbie on Time, Space, and Consciousness, a New Science of Life After Death. So I want to turn back to Jeff now for a moment to ask a little bit different question, because something that you are eminently qualified to answer, but a question that most people would find difficult, but it's one that you've been looking at for 50 plus years. So Jeff, the simple question: where does consciousness come from?
That is a simple question, but it's not necessarily a simple question to answer.
I know. That's right.
But, you know, great thinkers have been contemplating this question for centuries, if not millennia. And most recently, I think one of the greatest modern thinkers who looked at it was the founder of quantum physics himself, whose name is on the tip of my tongue. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about.
Max Planck or Planck?
Max Planck, exactly. Max Planck, who gave an interview in the 1930s for a major German newspaper, and he put it very directly. He said, we can't get underneath consciousness. Consciousness is the foundation, and by that he didn't mean individual consciousness, as far as I can tell. He was talking about what philosophers often call mind at large. The great German philosopher Schopenhauer referred to it as the one mind that sees through the eyes of every sentient creature. That there's no getting underneath that. In fact, he said the entire physical universe emerges from consciousness, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. Consciousness is the basis of everything that we know. And of course, you get the same idea from the great philosopher René Descartes, who said, I think, therefore I am. We don't have any other basis for knowing the universe except through our own consciousness. That's where it begins. And there's no getting underneath it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you know how Descartes died?
Offhand, I don't. How did he die?
Well, he was in a coffee shop, and they offered him a cup of coffee, and then they asked him, would you like some milk with your coffee, Mr. Descartes? And he said, I think not. And poof, disappeared. All right, anyway. Trying to keep it light here, but we're delving into some very, very deep subjects. Leo, if you would like to add some thoughts on where does consciousness come from, please do.
Yes, I'm still chuckling over Descartes' sudden demise there. Careful not to repeat that one. Yes, I think we know that there have always been these two theories as to how it works: consciousness, the brain, and so on. One is that the brain creates consciousness, and that model is basically like some sort of projecting type instrument, so that when you switch off the instrument, you switch off the brain, the consciousness also switches off, like a television, like a projected film. That's it, out. And there's also another theory that the mind receives consciousness. So people have talked in the past, using the kind of technological metaphors that were available to them, of things like the telegraph and then the telephone, and in my essay I came up with cloud consciousness to tap into our kind of modern computing metaphors, and that's essentially that consciousness is out there and is received by this sophisticated mechanism of the brain. And if we look at these two models, we find that the first one, mind generating consciousness, has some considerable problems. We've not really found where that consciousness is. With all this poking around in people's brains that's been going on for some time now, we've been able to damage parts of it and invoke certain responses through stimulus and so on. But we've not really found consciousness, and we would be able to produce some of those effects by stimulating other parts of the body and not just the brain. So these sorts of experiments don't necessarily prove the model or that theory there. But on the other hand, when we think about all of these really strange experiences that people have and that they shouldn't have, according to the first model, such as having what I called actual death experiences, because a lot of the most dramatic so-called near-death experiences happen when people are clinically dead. So they're not near death, they are dead, and they should have no mental functioning, and yet can come back and make detailed reports on what they've seen and heard and so on. And that just shouldn't happen. But these things have been verified. And, instances like that shouldn't happen according to Model 1. But if the brain is only receiving consciousness, then yes, of course, when the brain's off, consciousness can still continue. And that model would fit the personal experiences that are reported by a huge number of people. So that's, I think, where we can start to think that we have the better model in thinking that the brain receives consciousness. And it fits in with this kind of mind at large, or these kind of ideas that consciousness perhaps exists on a greater level than we think it does. Because again, we have these very particular viewpoints. We're kind of trapped behind our eyeballs looking out, and we see time moving in one direction. We see consciousness or feel consciousness or experience consciousness as really trapped within this skull. But then we have situations in which we see that time doesn't always appear to move like an arrow, and consciousness doesn't always appear to be trapped within the skull. So that's really what got me into the theory of the brain receiving consciousness, because it fits the evidence that we have.
Yes. Thank you very much for that. And and as Jeff pointed out in his essay, I mean, that's I think you also pointed out some even a prior source in the 19th century, but Jeff pointed to William James in the 20th century with establishing the idea as the brain as a filter, a three-dimensional filter of consciousness, which makes a lot of sense to me. And I think sometimes, guys, we don't have to go to a near-death experience to experience consciousness outside of the physical body, because at least for myself, I mean, I remember, so many times when I used to use an alarm clock, which I haven't done for 30 plus years, but I would when the alarm clock would go off and I was dreaming, I could experience actually it was sometimes called the boss soul jumping back into the body. I clearly, my consciousness was someplace else and it jumped back in, you know, I mean, at least it was very definitive for myself. I mean, I don't know that anybody's written about that much in the literature, but that's the way I felt about it. So, you know, we have a lot of these examples all around. Also, I would say, too, in this idea of time as an arrow and linear time, it's really a recent idea, as I alluded to before, because, you know, in Da Vinci's time, and particularly the beginning of his lifetime, he thought of the natures as emanating consciousness, and the I was the passive receiver of that. And then it kind of flips, you know, after linear perspective comes in, it flips, and it's the I, the ego, that is now imbuing the world with movement, and that's how we kind of, we usurp time as human beings. We kind of usurped it for ourselves. That's where I would go with that anyway. And I think what you are doing, because of what's been happening, you know, you both pioneers are building on what happened with quantum theory, and you're true scientists, I want to echo that, which are working with that paradigm, as you, Leo, said in your essay, you know, that time is an emergent property of quantum entanglement. So I really think you're getting at something very, very important. But Jeff, do you have any further things you want to add on consciousness? I bet you do.
Well, I could say this, Glenn, that one of the reasons that our society seems so resistant to the ideas that Leo and I have been discussing is because we live in a materialistic age, and in particular, an age in which science and engineering have produced all of these marvelous phenomena, cell phones and jet airplanes and nuclear bombs. They are all regulated by time as a sort of the tick-tock beat that keeps all the mechanisms running. So these days, everybody seems to have a cell phone, and the cell phones are all attuned to the clocks that come out of the Greenwich Observatory and that are accurate down to thousandths of a second. And computers around the world are all synchronized moment by moment. And we tend to buy into the idea that the worldview of mechanisms, the mechanistic worldview that works so well for technology, should be able to describe everything in nature. It's gotten to the point where we think of ourselves, our human beings, as nothing more than being sophisticated machines.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that some of these technological devices, though, are just preparing us to become more psychic? Because I mean, you know, there's a ton of literature about people anticipating phone calls, you know, before you had cell phones. But it seems like now people can anticipate cell phone calls, texts, everything, you know, you know, I mean, my wife and I have been married for close to 34 years. So, you know, sometimes we answer the other person's question before it's been said out loud, you know, and then we'll have a little discussion. Who did you, Elsa, answer the question? You answered the question. I didn't even say it. She said, yes, you did. Because she just heard it, you know. Isn't that so? Is it possible that these material devices are just a bridge to a more psychic world? What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think, you know, I agree with Jeff there that, you know, this kind of mechanistic view is very depersonalized and you know, disenchanted and so on. But then on the other hand, with technology now, excuse me, with technology now, we're reaching really accelerated levels. And, what does the future hold with that technology? There's a conference coming up with the Royal Anthropological Institute, and it's going to be online in June this year. And their theme is artificial intelligence and humanity. What are the challenges? Where are we going with this? And I'll be presenting a paper on really the construction of the afterlife through technology. And I think, at one point we're seeing just a mechanical reproduction of people who have died. So, we've already had these projections and in some cases holograms of people, famously Freddie Mercury and Ronnie James Dio and so on have come back from beyond the grave to perform again in front of their fans. But clearly that isn't the people themselves. Their consciousness has not returned. It's not there in these depictions. But as we move into accelerated machine learning and really quantum computing, and if we think of consciousness itself may be a quantum process within our brains, are we actually going to reach a stage in which we can communicate directly with consciousness through our machines because of that quantum capability? So that there are really staggering possibilities ahead, I think, that only science fiction writers could really envisage for us.
Okay.
To add to that a bit, Glenn, there's a field known as instrumental trance communication, sometimes called EVP, electronic voice phenomena. There are tens of thousands of hobbyists around the world exploring this phenomenon. It's been going on now probably for a good half century, ever since the development of the early tape recorders. And what you've got are people who believe that they are having conversations, and often lengthy two-way conversations with their deceased loved ones using technology for that very purpose. One of the foremost people engaged in this activity is the former Portuguese diplomat, Dr. Anabela Cardoso, who has published what was known as the ITC Journal, a regular journal publication of reports from these people. Dr. Cardoso has published in scientific journals her experiences. She believes that people who are talented, it takes a certain, I think you'd have to say, mediumistic talent, but a penchant for doing it in conjunction with technology. And it's easy to laugh at these people and say, oh, it's just psychological projection, that they're just seeing things that are random patterns, and then they imagine that they're having these conversations. But researchers, including scholars from the Society for Psychical Research, have looked into this and have attested, particularly in the case of Dr. Cardoso, that the voices are clear, they are unmistakable, it's not a question of random sounds, and they interact back and forth in an intelligent way. So there is a sense that, yes, technology is in fact being used by entities on the other side to communicate with us.
So technology is the medium. I mean, it's the medium. So you don't even need the human medium in there, and of course, Jeff, you know the answer to what do you call a petite psychic who's escaped from jail?
Oh, you run this by me in the past, but you'll have to refresh my memory. A small, medium, at large.
Exactly. Small, medium, at large. Okay, so anyways, I want to turn next to Let's turn directly to the subject of death. Leo, you already touched on it before when you were talking about how some called near-death experiences are really happen after a clinical death. So I think you stated, therefore they're dead. But that doesn't fit with the Western worldview that demands beginning, middles, and ends. So it can't be the end if they came back. That's the way that that worldview, I'm sure you realize why they still goes in the category of near death even after clinical death. So what really is death? What is death? That's what I want you to answer, and I'm gonna go to who would like to take that first.
But can I take that actually? Because you brought me up during that question.
Yes, I think so.
It's a great question. What is death? Because it falls into the category of things like consciousness and time. We think we know what it is, but it's difficult to define. And death has been problematic in medicine for some considerable while. When do we really say that somebody has gone forever? And with modern medicine, we're being able to move those barriers further and further back, so that what would have been dead 150, 25 years ago is no longer necessarily dead today. A lot of the skeptics will come in and say that, if you can be resuscitated, then you're not dead. But that's not really correct. That's just playing with words. What happens in death? Death is defined as lack of heart function, lack of lung function. So you're not breathing, the blood is not being pumped around, and the lack of electrical signal in the brain. So you've got all the major components of what makes your body tick are off. They're out. And in that situation, there should be no sensation of consciousness, no conscious experience, because the machine is off. If we're thinking about these machine metaphors that we have, then this machine that creates consciousness is switched off. It's defunct. It's just for throwing on the scrap heap now. But people come back from that because we've advanced these barriers with technology again, so that they can come back from what would have been final and ultimate dead state and can report conscious experiences from those states. And then most importantly, we have instances where those experiences are verified by other people who weren't dead at the time, in the operating theater or whatever context it might be. So I think that, we should use the term actual death experience, because we've gone beyond what we would define as dead. The question of being able to be brought back from that is a technological aspect. And again, that fits in with what I was saying maybe about, artificial intelligence, that it's our technology is really going to be pushing at the boundaries of death, of life, and of life after death. And it's also going to be pushing at the boundaries of what we think consciousness is. When we have artificial intelligence, what will that be like? How will it be conscious? How will we know? Will machines take this solipsistic view that they think and therefore they are, and only think of us as their thoughts? So we're going into huge unknowns here through technology, which is really, it's quite exciting as much as it's terrifying.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Leo. So, and back to Jeffrey. So, what is death?
Well, I think Leo has raised a fascinating point concerning the near-death experience and describing it as an actual death experience. I would say, however, that the near-death experience is a mystical experience that's akin to experiences that are reported around the world by mystics of all stripes. And you don't necessarily need to be near death in order to have such an experience, or you don't need to have had an actual death experience. And in order to have that, for example, there's been some wonderful research done called meditation-induced near-death experience with advanced Buddhist meditators who can go into a meditative state and have the same experience. Which is indistinguishable from the reports of near-death experience using psychographic measurements such as the near-death experience scale, also known as the Grayson scale, that is used to measure the depth of such experiences. So when you ask what is death or what is consciousness, ultimately it seems to me that we have to look to the experience of the mystics. As a whole, and that when they say that all is one, when they say that consciousness is like a pure, clear space, when they talk about ego detachment, these things are all part of what it means to be human, what it means to be conscious. And I would say that our modern science of psychology is only just beginning to explore these areas.
God, that's so beautiful. Thank you. I'm smiling from ear to ear. And it reminds me, I'm not sure if it was in both of your essays, but I know that you brought up that near-death experience also brought in love. So it's this experience of oneness, the experience of oneness that everything is all radically interconnected seems to naturally lead to love. And of course, you've got love right in your name, Mr. Jeffrey Mishlove. So but who was it who wrote about it in their essay? Was it you, Leo, that about near-death experiences and love, or was that Jeffrey?
I think that was Jeff with that one.
Oh, it was Jeff. So I go to you, Jeff. Why do you think that is?
Yes, it's one of the most consistent reports that near-death experiencers talk about. And I think a good example is Elizabeth Crone. Now, she's a woman who was struck by lightning and co-authored a book about it with Professor Jeffrey Kripal called Change in a Flash. And she talks about an experience of love that was so powerful that it transcended anything she had ever known. And she made a point of saying, I'm a mother. I know about love. I would say, in terms of our conventional human love, the love a mother has for a child is incredibly powerful. But she said, this was way beyond that. And she said, not only did I feel surrounded by it, I became it. And that's another characteristic that people in the near-death experience report. You're not an observer when you're there in the same sense that we are observers of our life here in this physical reality. You become what you observe. In the near-death experience or the mystical experience. It's a whole different way of perceiving reality by being it. And the most intense qualities of love are consistently reported by people who have had this experience, and also, of course, the mystical experience. Great mystics report the very same thing.
Indeed. And sometimes we can have that kind of experience just in a dream too. At least I feel I've had the experience where I'm not observing. I think we have a tendency, right, as soon as we wake up, we report the dream in the language of our waking state. So it's I saw this, but sometimes in the dream, the consciousness is diffused and it's in the whole image. I mean, it's just, you said being it, the love. I mean, it can be completely immersive. So thank you for that. That's really, really important. And I think we could also add psychedelics, entheogens, such as magic mushrooms also take us to this place of complete interconnectedness. So the last question I want to ask you both, and really, because this is really the arc of this dialogue, with all that we've said. I mean, how can we now go about creating a new science of life after physical death? How can we make that possible? I mean, how can we put our heads together here and make this happen? Now, turn to you, Leo.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think that's where somebody like Robert Bigelow comes in, because he can make these things happen. And with his institute, I think we're going to see a lot of interesting developments. It's a really exciting time for this subject, because people have been working on it for a long time. It's the 140th anniversary this year of the Society for Psychical Research. And they've been asking these questions. They've been coming up with the evidence, scientific evidence over that period. Of course, we have evidence for longer than that. So we've got the evidence. You mentioned that right at the beginning. But now we've really got some energy in the discipline, and we've got this new institute that can really forge ahead. And I think that's what we need.
Mm-hmm.
I can add a little bit to that.
Please add.
I would say that what we've seen going back to the ancient mystics, to people who have been exploring through spiritualist mediumship, through people who are lucid dreamers, people who look at hypnotic regression experiences or advanced meditation experiences. I regard all of these categories of exploration as falling into what I call psychonautics. Sort of the opposite of astronautics. Instead of going into outer space, they're going into inner space. And I think we're at a point today where these psychonauts are the equivalent of the explorers who 500 years ago, or now close to 700 years ago, in the 15th century, explorers were just crossing the ocean and discovering new continents. And now we're probing inner space and discovering new continents of the mind and coming back with reports about what we're learning from inner space, lucid dreams, people who can learn to fly in their dreams, people who are looking at the interface between the dream realm and the afterlife realm, people in quantum physics who are developing mathematical models of hyperspace and how consciousness and hyperspace may work together. All of these things are enabling us, I think, at this point to create new maps of consciousness itself, maps that will include the afterlife. And so I think we're at a very exciting point in human history.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing in Gene Houston's psychonauts. So you guys are those explorers. You're going into tremendous realms of consciousness that others have not been willing to explore. But yeah, I want to kind of drill down on this just a little bit harder, see if you guys can help me here, though, because, I took a class at NYU a long time ago from a woman named Tamara Green. I was in the music business at the time, and I just took a class. It was not part of a MA program, but it ended up leading to me joining an MA program. But the class was called, and you might find this of interest, Leo, it was called Witchcraft, Magic, Alchemy, the Occult, and the Emergence of Modern Science. And that class really changed my life also, and because the key thing that I noticed is that the narrative that is used by modern science today to try to justify a particular worldview is highly distorted. So what we learned in that class, which I'm sure you're both very well aware of, is that some of the people that are often put out as the forerunners of modern science, the Newtons, the Galileos, and etc., the typical narrative ignores the fact that they were alchemists or astrologers or anything that no longer is held in the New York Times favor, to bring back in the New York Times, and yet, so how can we change the narrative? Because really, I mean, you're both incredibly articulate spokespersons for a different narrative, but how can we get that story to be believed?
Well, I think what you're doing right now, Glenn, is a way to change the narrative. And there are 1,000 podcasts and YouTube channels, such as New Thinking Aloud, where I'm uploading 4 videos every week describing these things. I think ultimately we're in a planet with 7-8 billion people, and they're all talking to each other. And it's a question of, at every opportunity, interjecting these ideas into the conversation. And the good news is they've always been part of the conversation. It's only this little blip of Western culture for the last 300-400 years where the guardians of reality and the educational and scientific institutions are trying to keep it out. But the general population has always had a strong interest and will continue to do so. And one of the wonderful things I believe about the internet is it's possible for people such as myself to establish a YouTube channel and bypass the guardians who would otherwise forbid widespread public discussion of these things.
Wow. And thank you so much for all the incredible interviews you've done over the years. And thanks to your incredible volunteer staff that's cataloging them. Which is an immense task, but it's being done. It's almost done, right? So it's fantastic. I really appreciate it. So any last thoughts, Leo, before we come to wrap up today?
Yes, actually, I just wanted to add, it was funny to hear Jeff talk about psychonauts, because about 5-10 minutes before he mentioned that particular word, I had exactly been thinking about that. I just didn't use the word later on. So I think somebody's reading somebody's mind somewhere there. So that's lovely to see, because I think he's right. We're exploring these new frontiers, and there are a lot of people in this club now who are doing that, and it does fit in with what you were saying about the origins of science coming out of things like alchemy and so on. Alchemy became chemistry, and astronomy grew out of astrology and so on. So that there are these kind of not talked of origins for the sciences, and I think that we're going back to seeing that. These aspects, these sort of more spiritual aspects, the occult theory that everything is connected, we're coming back to those things through science. So science is kind of coming full circle on itself. And that's going to be really interesting to see.
Yes, that's very true. That was the basis of the dialogues that we held between Native American elders and Western scientists, that modern, in particular quantum science, had come full circle back to a Native American worldview that represented radical process and relationship. Everything is moving, everything is interconnected, because, inside an atom, there really aren't any things there, as I think Alfred North Whitehead said. So, thank you for bringing in the word occult, which I just want to state, though, simply means hidden.
Yeah.
So it's we got to take it out of the cult realm, and it's just means hidden. We have to bring it out of hiding, and we're doing that today, I think. So thank you. Any last thoughts, Jeffrey?
Well, I'm glad that we got to talk about love. I know a wonderful philosopher, Neil Grossman, suggests that we should study the reports of the near-death experiencers who describe this heavenly realm of love and see if we can't create a world here on this physical plane that more resembles the world they talk about.
Oh my God, what a beautiful way to end. Well, you know, I'm writing a book on love, so original love. So thank you. Thank you. That's a really perfect way to end it. I couldn't agree more. I mean, we create our own heaven and hell, and we can create a loving world. And so, yes, study love. Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey Mishlove. Thank you, Mr. Leo Ruickbie. What a scintillating conversation, as I expected it would be. So thank you so much for the incredibly good work you do in the world, and may you always be blessed. This program is made possible in part by Select Books, Waterside Publications, BizGenix, and the Ecology Prime Media Channel. Produced and edited by Kenichi Sugihara. Native flute music by Orlando Secatero from the Pathways CD. Liberty Song by artist Ron Crowder, written by Ron Crowder, Jim Casey, and Danny Casey. The Circle for Original Thinking is a grassroots think tank whose mission is to seek out the deep origins of contemporary thought in order to remember and restore heart-centered wisdom for humanity and all our relations on Earth. This podcast is available on Select Books, Inc., Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever podcasts are normally heard. For more information, go to originalthinking.us or originalpolitics.us. And you can also find and purchase my books, Original Thinking and Original Politics, there. Thank you for listening. And until next time, many blessings of good health and well-being to you. Thank you.